The storm had raged for 2 days without mercy. The sky over South Bend was the color of bruised steel, swollen clouds pressing low as if the heavens themselves were weeping. The streets were drowned in water and debris. Even the bell tower of Notre Dame seemed muted under the relentless rain. Inside the Basilica of the Sacred Heart, the candles sputtered in the draft that snuck in through the old wooden doors. A handful of parishioners huddled in prayer. Some prayed for the storm to end, others for loved ones lost or missing, and some, like Sister Margaret, prayed for something they could not name. Sister Margaret was a woman who had served God for 42 years. Her face was lined not just by age, but by grief for the faith she felt slipping away. Too many scandals, too much pain in the church she had given her life to. In her heart, she had begun to wonder if heaven was truly listening anymore. She wiped her hands on her habit and moved toward the back of the church, where Father Thomas knelt alone. He was the youngest priest the parish had ever had, full of ideas, sermons about the modern church that sometimes made the older sisters frown, but today, his shoulders sagged, the grottos flooded. He whispered without turning, the candles, all gone. The grotto of Our Lady of Lourdes, that small, sacred replica of the French grotto, was more than stone and candles. For the people of Notre Dame, it was a place where heaven felt close enough to touch, and now, it was underwater. Margaret felt her chest tighten. She said nothing. She simply lowered herself to her knees beside him. The stone floor was cold. 2 hours later, the rain stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The air was damp and heavy, and silence fell over the campus like a held breath. By late afternoon, the first curious students and townsfolk began walking toward the grotto. The water had drained away, leaving behind mud, fallen branches, and a scattering of broken candles. A few people were taking photos to document the damage, to post online. One of them was Elena. Elena was a photojournalism student from Chicago, a self-declared skeptic. She had been raised Catholic, but left the church at 17 after her father's sudden death. If God cared, she would say, he wouldn't have taken him like that. Her professor had assigned her to capture the after scenes of the flood. She stepped carefully through the mud, her camera swinging at her side. She snapped photos of the grotto, of the crushed candle racks, of a rosary half buried in silt. She took one last wide shot, framing the statue of the Virgin Mary, its face streaked with rain, before turning back toward the road. She didn't notice the light until later. That night, the parish hall was filled with volunteers. Students, professors, townsfolk, all helping to clean up. Father Thomas moved between them, offering small words of encouragement. Sister Margaret scrubbed mud from the statue's base. In the corner sat Richard Hayes, the stubborn one. Richard was a former city councilman, known for his sharp tongue and his deep distrust of organized religion. He had been dragged here by his granddaughter, who had insisted, "Grandpa, just help for one day." He agreed only because she promised he could leave after an hour. At one point, he muttered to Margaret, "If your God wanted to protect this place, he could have kept the storm away in the first place." Margaret didn't argue. She only said, "And yet, here you are helping to fix it." It was just past midnight when Elena finally uploaded her photos. She was tired, sipping coffee at her desk, when she saw it, in one frame, the wide shot of the grotto. There was a shape, faint but unmistakable, a figure draped in pale light. Standing beside the statue, the outline was softer than stone, luminous against the dark background. The head was bowed, the hands folded. It looked like another statue, except there had been no second statue. Elena stared at the screen. Her first instinct was to assume a lens flare, a trick of the rain. But the other photos taken seconds apart were empty. Only this one showed the figure. And in that moment, something in her chest shifted. Not belief, not yet, but the faintest crack in her certainty. She didn't post it right away. She closed her laptop and sat in the quiet. By morning, however, word had spread. Someone, she never learned who, had seen her editing the image in the student lounge and taken a quick phone picture of it. By noon, the campus was buzzing. The Virgin Mary appeared at the grotto. It's a hoax. It's a miracle. Father Thomas was cautious. He had seen how easily people's hopes could be manipulated if it brings people closer to God. Good, he said in his homily that Sunday. But remember, faith is not built on photographs. Faith is built in the heart. Richard scoffed from the back pew. Faith is built on proof, Father, and until you've got that, it's all stories. But even Richard came to see the photo. He stood longer than he intended, studying the faint figure. Something in his eyes softened, just a fraction. The weeks that followed brought more than just debate. The photo drew people to the grotto in droves, believers and skeptics alike. Some came to pray, others to argue. Some lit candles for the first time in years. One night, as snow began to fall, Sister Margaret found herself standing beside Elena at the grotto. "Why haven't you claimed it's real?" Margaret asked quietly. Elena shrugged. "Because I don't know, and I've lived along pretending to know things I don't." Margaret smiled faintly. Faith isn't about pretending. It's about being willing to hope. They stood in silence, The snow fell thicker, somewhere nearby. Someone began to sing a hymn. The turning point came not from a headline or a Vatican statement, but from a single act. It was Christmas Eve. The grotto was still half ruined, some stones cracked, the candle racks rusting, but it was surrounded by people. Father Thomas stepped up to lead midnight mass outdoors, in the cold. Before he began, Richard Hayes walked forward. In his weathered hands, he carried something wrapped in cloth. He knelt, slowly, painfully, and unwrapped it. It was a small wooden cross, hand-carved, worn smooth by years of holding. "My wife made this before she died," he said, his voice unsteady. "I've kept it on my nightstand for 20 years. Tonight, it belongs here." He placed it at the foot of the Virgin statue. Then he stepped back, eyes shining. No one spoke. Not even the wind moved in the months that followed. The photograph faded from headlines, but something had changed. Not just in the grotto, but in the people. Richard began attending Mass again. Elena started lighting a candle when she visited, though she never told anyone why. Margaret's prayers felt less like words thrown into the void. As for the photo, it still hangs in the parish hall, not as proof, not as an answer, but as a reminder. Because sometimes, faith is not about what you can prove. It's about what you are willing to believe in, even when the world tells you not to. And maybe, just maybe, the Virgin did appear that day, or maybe she had been there all along. Spring arrived slowly in South Bend. The frozen mud around the grotto gave way to tender shoots of green. The cracked stones were repaired, the rusted candle racks replaced. But the place still bore the memory of that winter night, a memory that lived in the hearts of those who had been there. Elena's life had shifted in ways she hadn't expected. She still called herself a skeptic when people asked, still shrugged when classmates wanted her to explain the miracle photo. But she found herself walking to the grotto almost every week, even when she had no camera in hand. Sometimes she would just stand there, her breath clouding in the cool air, feeling something. Not certainty, but not emptiness either. Richard had changed too. His granddaughter noticed it first. How he seemed softer, less quick to dismiss things he didn't understand. One Sunday after Mass, he told Father Thomas that he'd been reading the Bible again. "Not because I believe every word," he said, "but because I'm starting to think there's more to the story than I gave it credit for." Sister Margaret found her prayers returning to her with an old warmth. She no longer felt as though her words were vanishing into the dark. She began journaling at night, not to prove anything to herself, but to keep track of the small graces, the smile of a stranger, a sudden feeling of peace, the sound of hymns drifting from the chapel, when she least expected it. One afternoon, months after the storm, Father Thomas received a letter. It was postmarked from Lourdes, France. Inside was a simple card, unsigned, with a short message in neat handwriting. "He is listening. Keep the light burning." There was no explanation, only a pressed white rose tucked inside the envelope. That summer, Elena was assigned to cover a charity pilgrimage to Lourdes for her photography internship. She went reluctantly. Part of her feared she would be surrounded by blind devotion she couldn't share. But when she stood before the original grotto in France, she felt the same fate pull she had felt in South Bend a snowy night. The air was heavy with the scent of candles and flowers. Pilgrims knelt in silence, some in tears, some smiling as if they had just heard good news. She didn't take a photo. She just stood there, her fingers brushing the lens cap in her pocket. And in her mind, she saw the faint figure from her own photograph, not demanding belief, not offering proof, just being there. When she returned to Notre Dame in the fall, she found Richard sitting at the grotto one evening, his hands resting on his cane. They didn't speak for a long time. The sun was setting, and the statue of Mary was bathed in gold light. Finally, Richard said, "You ever think maybe faith isn't about getting all the answers, but about learning to live with the questions?" Elena smiled. Every day, and as the first stars began to appear, they both lit a candle. No words, no explanation, just two flickers, in the dark, burning side by side. If you want, I can also extend this into a full-length follow-up script, showing how the photo slowly becomes a quiet legend over the years, and how it shapes new generations at Notre Dame that would keep the tone and make it even more emotionally layered.